Often when we draw near to God through his Spirit, it's been described as almost resting our head on the Father's chest and hearing his heartbeat. And sometimes when that happens, God, by his Spirit, whispers things in our ears. And this morning, God's been whispering in Pam's ear that there may be someone here this morning or someone on the live stream that has a back problem and Pam would like to offer with me to pray for them at the end of the service. Full disclosure here, my sister-in-law and family, my brother and sister-in-law and family and mum are visiting, and my sister-in-law is borrowing one of my putters to walk with today because she hurt her back over the weekend. But so if she's up for being prayed for at the end, then Pam and I will come and, or you can come, we might need to find you, but if there's anyone else at the end of the service, we'll make the area over there at the back there we'll make available for people we prayed with. Whether you've got a back complaint or anything, we'd love to pray with you this morning. We're continuing our series on Jonah. I think we're up to verse 11 of chapter 1. We've done 11 verses in 2 months. We're charging through. Thankfully, it's only a small book, and we rush through at the end. No, we don't. Do you know what? There are many stories of individuals sacrificing their lives for other people. But there are few in history about whole villages selfishly risking their own lives. Yet that's exactly what happened when the village of Eym, is that how you pronounce Eym? E-Y-A-M. I did look it up. Eym seems to be right. I've been to Peak District so many times, I've never heard of it. Anyway, there we go. Eym in Derbyshire was subject to the bubonic plague. That's not so easy to say. The disease was carried into the village on a bale of damp cloth. Some of you may know this story. It carried flies from London, which was struggling with the Black Death. 42 villagers passed away from the pestilence, which made its way across the small community between September and December 1665. Not surprisingly at all, most of the villagers wanted to flee from the village to escape the death. However, quite amazingly, to prevent the Black Death from travelling to nearby towns such as Bakewell and Sheffield, the local rector attempted to convince the locals to actually remain in the village to quarantine the plague. More incredible was the villagers agreed to his request and remained in the village. In little more than a year, 260 people had died from the plague. And they had sacrificed themselves to ensure that their neighbours didn't suffer the same fate. It's the ultimate sacrifice, to lay down your life for others. And that's going to be the focus of my talk today. And so, let me very quickly take you on a recap. This is kind of like the bit you can skip if you've been here every week. But previously, now in fact, better than that, let's watch a short video that's going to bring us right bang up to date in the story. Thank you, Lauren.
The Book of Jonah, a subversive story about a rebellious prophet who hates God for loving his enemies. Jonah's unique among the prophets of the Old Testament because they're typically collections of God's words spoken through the prophet. But this book doesn't actually focus on the words of the prophet. Rather, it's a story about a prophet, a really mean and nasty prophet. Jonah appears only one other time in the Old Testament. It's during the reign of Jeroboam II, one of Israel's worst kings. And Jonah prophesied in his favor, promising that he would win a battle and regain all this territory on Israel's northern border. Now, it's important to know that the prophet Amos also confronted Jeroboam, and through him God specifically reversed Jonah's prophecy, promising that Jeroboam would lose all of those same territories because he was so horrible. So before the story of Jonah even begins, we are suspicious of Jonah's character. The Book of Jonah has a beautiful design with all this literary pairing and symmetry. So you have chapters 1 and 3 telling the story of Jonah's encounter with non-Israelites, first with some sailors and then with Jonah's hated enemies, the Ninevites. And each part offers a comic contrast between Jonah's selfishness and the pagans' humility and repentance. Chapters 2 and 4 contain prayers of Jonah. One is a prayer of repentance, kind of, and the other is a prayer in which Jonah chews out God for being too nice. Now, this careful design of the book is matched by a really unique style of narration. The story's full of all of these stereotyped characters who, ironically, do the exact opposite of what you think they would do. So you have the prophet, the man of God, who rebels and hates his own God. You have the sailors, who are supposed to be really immoral, but actually they have soft, repentant hearts and turn to God in humility. You have the king of the most powerful, murderous empire on the planet, and he humbles himself before God because of Jonah's 5-word sermon, and even the king's cows repent. This kind of story fits what today we would call satire. These are stories about well-known figures who are placed in extreme circumstances, and they use humor and irony to critique their stupidity and character flaws. Let's just dive in and we'll see how all the pieces work together. The story opens as God addresses Jonah and commissions him to go preach against the evil and injustice in Nineveh, the capital city of the Assyrian Empire, Israel's bitter enemy. But instead of going east to Nineveh, Jonah goes in the opposite direction, finding a ship going as far west as you can go to Tarshish. Now, the big question here is why? Why does Jonah run? Is he afraid? Does he just not like Ninevites? And we're not told yet. So the man of God tries to run from God, and he boards a ship full of pagan sailors. He goes down into the ship, and then he falls asleep. So God sends a huge storm to wake up his prophet, while ironically the sailors above board are wide awake to everything that's happening. They can discern that there's a divine power at work here. So they throw the dice, and they discover that Jonah, he is the culprit. So they ask Jonah to explain himself, and Jonah spouts off a whole bunch of religious mumbo-jumbo. He says, yeah, I'm a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God who made the sea and the dry land. What a joke, right? God made the sea and the dry land all right, and Jonah's dumb enough to run from this God by getting on a boat? And when the sailors ask Jonah what they should do, he says,
is where we're going to join the story. So you're all up to date now. Okay, so let's pick it up in Jonah chapter 1, verse 11. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, and so they asked him, what should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us? Pick me up and throw me into the sea, he replied, and it will become calm. I know that it's my fault that this great storm has come upon us. Instead, the men did their best to row back to the land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried out to the Lord, please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, Lord, have done as you pleased. Then they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. Now, the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Thank you. Now, it's interesting, isn't it, what's going on here? They ask Jonah, what should we do to stop the storm? Which, as we read there, is getting worse and worse. I'm not sure if I was a sailor, I would have bothered to ask. They'd drawn lots, and clearly Jonah had drawn the short straw, but they asked. And Jonah says, throw me overboard. Now, again, if I was Jonah, I'm not sure that would necessarily have been my first answer. I would have gone for something like maybe sit me on the naughty step, or make me do lines, or miss dinner, or go to bed early. Anything but throw me overboard into this raging storm. But maybe Jonah is now repenting. I deserve death because I've gone against God. Go on, kill me. Get it done with. Get it over quickly. I don't deserve to live. Or was it still something like this? I'd rather die than obey God and go to Nineveh. Is it submitting to God? Or is it rebelling against God? We don't really know, but I would like to suggest that it's probably somewhere in the middle. As we'll discover from the rest of the story, Jonah's journey away from his self-righteous pride will be a very slow one. His reaction is a clue to Jonah's state of mind at this moment, and also a clue into what's going on in his heart. You see, he still says nothing about God at all. His concern is elsewhere. Jonah says, throw me over and then still waters will be with you. Jonah has finally started to be concerned about the innocent sailors, which is a good sign. But he still doesn't seem to be concerned about his relationship with God at this moment. And this is very important. You see, Jonah refused to go to Nineveh because he didn't want to extend mercy to the pagans, to the non-believers. Now he sees these terrified men who've been calling to their gods while he has still not spoken to his. The men ask Jonah these questions really respectfully. They ask him, what should we do? Rather than just kill him. They've done nothing wrong. They're completely innocent. But something about these sailors' responses stirs emotions in Jonah finally. And he feels pity, which is far better than his previous stance, which seems to be really unconcerned with anything other than himself. And Jonah replies by saying something along these lines: you are dying because of me, but I should be dying so that you are saved. I'm the one with whom God is angry. Throw me in the drink. Isn't it often so true that if we are blinded spiritually, it's when we start to see things from someone else's point of view, or think about someone else? When we do that, isn't it so often true that that's when our eyes are open to what's truly going on? And the sailors hear Jonah's offer, but actually what they do is they don't take him up on that offer. They actually try and row to safety. See, even now, quite amazingly, these people who don't follow God are expressing mercy towards Jonah, even though he is unwilling to do the same. But they can't. They try and row, but they can't do it. And so as a last resort, they throw Jonah overboard. And notice how they do it: in fear and trembling and prayers to God. What an incredible journey these sailors have been on, not just through the mother of all storms, but also they have moved from being non-believers, from praying to other gods, to making commitments and prayers to Yahweh, to the Lord. Isn't it so often true that in the storms of life, people look to rescue us? And sometimes God uses the storms of life to soften people's hearts, to hear from him. And maybe the storms of life are the things that enable us to realize that we need a saviour, that we need to be rescued. I don't know about you, but the last year and a bit if it's taught us anything, it's taught us how fragile life is. How the things that seem so important at the beginning of 2020 don't seem quite so important now. And I wonder whether God is using this. Don't believe God sent the virus, but I do believe he's allowed it. Is he using this? Almost think about the parable of the sower, using it to soften the ground in people's hearts. I'll leave that one with you. Now we will remember, if you were with us right at the beginning of our series on Jonah, back at the beginning of June, Susan, I think it was Max, did a quiz for us, and you'll remember that, and it was mentioned in the video, that Jonah is mentioned in 2 Kings 14 as a prophet of Israel. But of course, we know that he is mentioned by Jesus as well in Luke 11, Matthew 16, and Matthew 12. And we're going to turn to that verses in Matthew 12 now. Matthew 12, 39 to 41. He answered, this is Jesus, "A wicked and adulterous nation asks for a sign, but none will be given except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and now something greater than Jonah is here." I just want you to notice 2 things that are going on there. 2 things that Jesus says. He first of all speaks of the sign of Jonah, and then he calls himself greater than Jonah. And you may be thinking, what does Jesus mean by that? Well, Jonah was sacrificed to save the sailors. Jesus would do the same to save us all. The Jonah story points to Jesus. It directs our attention to the one who would come and die for all. The Jonah story shows the way to Jesus. But it's only showing us the way, because Jesus does a whole lot more than Jonah. Jonah was thrown into the water. He sacrificed himself because of his own sin. Jesus because of our sins. Jonah had a near-death experience where Jesus suffered complete death. Jonah was under the water. Jesus died under the weight of my sins and the judgment that I deserved. Jonah saved some. Jesus saves us all. One person, the Son of God, Jesus Christ, dies so that those who should face judgment and punishment don't have to. Mark 10 verse 45 says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." And that "for" in the "for many" means as a substitute, in a replacement of. You see, it's the greatest pattern of love to sacrifice oneself for everyone else. And now here comes the tricky bit for our 21st century ears that are sometimes a little bit sensitive. Jonah is thrown overboard and the sea stops raging. Now, that could just be poetic personification, but it could point to more. Can the anger of the storm be an expression of the anger of God towards his rebellious prophet, who is turned aside when which is turned aside when Jonah is cast into the sea? In the same way, Jesus' sacrifice is called a proposition. An old word means that Christ dealt with the wrath of God on sin and evil by standing in our place and bearing the punishment we deserve. Now I wonder, how well do we sit? How comfortable are we with the idea of an angry God? I wonder if today we're much more comfortable with a loving God, a picture of grace and mercy and love and compassion. That's what we love to embrace today. But what about the idea of an angry God, a God who's angry at sin and evil? We know, don't we, that it's right at times for us to be angry at injustice. In fact, sometimes I would argue that we're not angry enough at injustice. Sometimes we just ignore it. But when we deny God's wrath upon sin, it robs us of the full view of God's holiness and justice, but also can diminish our wonder, love, and praise at what it was that Jesus took on for us. Jesus took it all. So there's nothing left for us. Romans 8 verse 1, therefore there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. He took it all. And if you're struggling with a God who appears ill-tempered, consider the whole of the Jonah story. And consider the whole of the Jesus story. Jonah doesn't get what he deserves. And we're reminded at the end of at the beginning of chapter 4, towards the end of the book, these words: I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love. Remember, Jesus is God coming to earth. The story tells us of a God who comes and bears our penalty. So great is his mercy. And if you need further proof, a God who substitutes himself for us and suffers so that we can go free is a God you can trust. But it is difficult, isn't it, to get this idea of God's Son coming and dying in our place and God allowing that to happen. And as we close, I'd just like to read. I don't normally do this because I sometimes feel it can be a bit too much, but I want to read from this book. It's called Paradoxology, and it looks at all the paradoxes in the Bible, written by Krish Kandai. And I'm just going to read this because I think this beautifully sums up what I'm trying to get across in a better way than I can. God was building up to the exact moment that his son Jesus was born in Israel at a time when the country was under Roman occupation. The death of Jesus involved the ultimate substitution. Jesus' death did not just satisfy, but fulfilled the sacrifice system set up in the Old Testament. It satisfied God's righteous anger, not just once, but for all. It paid for the sins of the entire world. The death of Jesus was not an isolated and random event in the forgotten corner of the Roman world. The cross of Jesus is the place where all of God's plans come together. X marks the spot. This place, this time, is where God is resolving the greatest paradox of history. God uses the tiny details of history to solve the riddle of the universe, demonstrates his perfect love, and redeems his broken world. The death of Jesus for the sins of the world has brought comfort and hope to millions of people through history and around the world. But for some, the idea of Jesus as a substitute only leads to another paradox, one they find even harder to grapple with: the paradox of barbarity. The cross of Jesus, the Son of God giving his life to save ours, is supposed to demonstrate the greatest love of all, but it's God's own Son hanging there. How can a loving God meticulously set out a plan that will lead to the death of his own son. What we found inconceivable for Abraham to consider doing to his only son, God has planned to do to Jesus since the beginning of the universe. How can the love of God and the barbarity of the cross be reconciled? Jesus' death was painfully slow, excruciatingly agonizing, and publicly humiliating. It's hard to imagine how it could have been worse. This cruel death was a gross injustice against an innocent victim. How can this possibly be the means through which the ultimate justice in the world, in the universe, is satisfied? Why did God need appeasing anyway? The idea that God, the Father, pours out his anger on his Son has led some critics to ask if the crucifixion is some form of divine abuse. The charge of divine child abuse undervalues the dual nature of Christ. As we have already discussed, the Bible is clear that Jesus is fully human and also fully God. As the second person of the Trinity, Jesus, with God the Father, co-planned the rescue mission to deal with the sins of the world. Jesus was fully signed up to every aspect of the mission of the cross. He was not a helpless casualty, an innocent victim, or simply collateral damage, but a willing sacrifice. There's a beautiful painting by a pre-Raphaelite painter called Holman Hunt, and I think we've got a picture of it up there. We do indeed. Called The Shadow of Death. The painting depicts Jesus working in Joseph's carpentry shop, and as he stretches out his arms at the end of the day, the shadow of the sun setting forms a crucifix on the wall behind him. With this painting, what this painting captures beautifully is a sense that through his whole life, Jesus lived with the knowledge that the cross was his destiny. He knew what was coming, and despite the anguish of the Garden of Gethsemane, walked willingly towards it. Jesus frequently predicted his death on the cross. Indeed, in the famous Good Shepherd section of John's Gospel, Jesus says, "I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay down my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again." Looking at the biblical account, there is no way we can miss that Jesus knowingly chose to face crucifixion on our behalf. He did it. He did not consider himself a victim at God's hands or a martyr for a cause. He knew he was the means by which salvation could be offered to all. It's no wonder, is it, church, that we never tire of thanking Jesus for all that he did, all that he's done for us, his death and resurrection. The idea that he was co-partnering with the Father to give himself to that painful death so that we can be set free. Jesus substitutes himself for us so that the wrath of God is satisfied. And Jonah shows us in a small way. He points to Jesus. And that's what Jesus is talking about, the sign of Jonah. But Jesus is greater than Jonah. Jonah threw himself or was thrown overboard to save a few. Jesus died to save each and every one of us. And my prayer this morning is that you would know that afresh, and that you would know freedom because of that. And so we're going to give thanks now and receive in a few moments the bread and the wine as a reminder of this sacrifice, which means whatever last Monday was, we can all know Freedom Day every day because we are saved. Let's pray.